Alright, welcome to my very first FSX tutorial. Right now I'm going to run over just the very bare basics so you can get your airplane in the air and understand some of the flight concepts and flight rules, different aspects of the autopilot, and that way you'll be more accustomed to flying more pristine. That way you can use some of the Pro ATC sessions that are in there. Starting off, we're just going to run through the instruments real quick. I'm using the in-cockpit view as opposed to these views, the 2D panels, because I can zoom in and therefore you can understand what I'm talking about. This one right here, this is your airspeed indicator. Obviously tells you how fast you're going. Your attitude indicator tells you at what attitude you are in relation to the horizon. This is the ground, this is the air. Pretty much simplistic, easy to understand. Each notch symbolizes an amount of degrees, and so does this according to your bank angle, or what angle your wings are at according to the ground. Okay, and you'll see how that works once we get in the air. This is the altitude indicator, or the altimeter, telling you how high you are off the ground. The 29.9, that's your barometric pressure, which we'll talk about that in a little bit later sessions. Then you have your turn coordinator. This tells you your slip and skid. That's a little bit more advanced. We'll talk about that later as well. This is your compass. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory. Everybody knows how to use a compass. Vertical speed indicator. This tells you how fast you are going. You're ascending or descending. What else should I? This is going to be used later on as well. This will be for your nav, following VORs and such. Now, obviously, you have a clock and then some instruments here to tell you fuel, temperature, your engine, your vacuum tubes, that kind of stuff. So let's get to flying. We'll go into here's the basics of the autopilot. You have this is your autopilot master switch. So let's turn your autopilot on. This should be your heading switch. Your plane will fly at a certain heading. Your nav, that'll be for VORs and or ILS. That's again for later. The approach also be for ILS. And your altitude, this will be, you can set your altitude right here. You can spin your wheel, or you can use minus or plus and just left click. That's also pretty self-explanatory. And then your VS, that's vertical speed, or your vertical airspeed. That's what we were talking about here. Right here, this will tell you how fast you're going up or down. You can use that to manually or to automatically put that in your autopilot. Alright, so right now we're currently sitting on runway 27 at Boyne City Municipal. This is actually the airport I fly out of in real life, so this will be a little bit easier for me to comprehend the approach patterns. I've flown this hundreds of times. Alright, so first off, we're gonna we are flying in a Cessna 172. Especially for runways as long as this one, we don't really need any flaps, so we're not going to use any. So we're going to put our heading at 270, because that's the heading of the runway. 270 is the same as saying, runway 27 is the same as saying heading 270. So we'll plug that in now. As you can see, the heading is practically lined up with where the airplane is facing right now. Obviously, that'll give you more of a acquaintance with the heading in regards to the runway number. Alright, so we'll just max the throttle here. We'll roll out. We're just going to do a basic left-hand pattern for the starting. Keep an eye on our airspeed here. Once our airspeed gets about 60 knots, we'll rotate and theoretically lift off the ground here. Just give it a gradual rotate, and there we go. And we'll start a steady climb. If you look right here, this is actually right where the plane I fly is parked, right in there. One of those hangars. It's pretty interesting how realistic FSX is. I absolutely love what they've done with this program. If only they could fix GameSpy. Some of the veterans to FSX know what I'm talking about. Alright, at 1,100 we lower the nose, check for traffic, which obviously there's not going to be any traffic in this session because I've set that to none, but in real life that's what you do. And then you continue your climb up to roughly about 1,500, 2,000. You don't really need to go any higher than that for the left-hand pattern. You'll make a left-hand turn 90 degrees. So we should end up at 180 or due south. There's 180. And then in real life we'd continue this for a little while just to get away from the airport so we have more time to line up with the runway. But considering I'm going to try to save time since it can only put 15-minute videos, we're going to make this a little quicker and expedite this approach here. It should be about due east. It's heading is 090 for due east. Keep it right there. For the trim, you just turn your number lock off and you use 1 and 7 in your number pad, and that will trim out the elevator. I'll show you if I can get this to work here. Alright, this is your elevator right here, and this will, as you can see, when you move it with the joystick, it's the same thing with the trim. It just sets it to a setting that will keep your nose at a certain attitude. It actually runs by air speed, so you have to keep that in mind. You'll get more acquainted with that the more that you fly. That's one of the biggest things that trips pilots up in real life, newer pilots, is that it's not setting your nose to a certain attitude, it's setting it to a certain airspeed. So if you were to bring the throttle back, you would descend because that's what your elevator's set to in regards to the trim. Okay, so now just to run over the autopilot real quick. This will just be a rough sketch of the autopilot. We're headed due east, so if we set this to 090 and the altitude to, let's say, 2,500, and we turn on the autopilot, then we turn on the heading, and we turn on the altitude. That will keep us at 090 heading and at 2,500 altitude. And we'll maintain that as long as the autopilot is turned on. Very helpful for when you're flying long flights, especially in FSX, because then you can just walk away from the computer and your plane will do its thing. The thing you hear about approaching minimums, that just means that you're at a minimum altitude where if you don't see the runway already, then you have to abort your approach, which it's a pretty clear day, so minimums are really irrelevant. And yes, I know the bank angle is way off here. I'm just trying to expedite this approach here. You would be making this at much more gradual turns, no more than 30 degrees bank, and that is indicated on here, right here, the second notch over, and you want to keep that right on there. That's to make your safe bank angle. And if you do any of the tutorials in FSX or any of the basic lessons you can do, that is mandatory, and they will fail you for that if you exceed 30-degree bank angle, just so you're aware. We're going to add full flaps here. This white line here is your flap extension speed, so you can't extend your flaps until your speed is slower than the max right there. If that makes any sense. So I've set my trim to keep it right at about 65 knots. That's where you want to keep it at least in a Cessna 172. I think it's about 70 knots or 65 knots, something like that for the approach. I'm not 100% sure, because I fly a Cessna 152, which is a little different. It's a 2-seater instead of a 4-seater, so the speeds are a lot slower for approach and takeoff.
300.
Nonetheless, so we are currently on the approach to runway 27, where we just took off from. We just flew 360 degrees around the airport and came back to the same runway we took off from, if that makes any sense. This airport does have a VASI, which stands for Vertical, it is Visual Approach Slope Indicator, that's what it is. And what that is you have a glide slope, which you follow all the way to the runway. It's just a fictitious or a frequency line that you follow. Either on ILS, you can do it automatically, which ILS stands for Instrument Landing System, and that will automatically bring your plane down on the preferred glide slope. That was a rough landing, but bear with me here. So there you go. That's pretty much the bare basics of the autopilot and the flight systems, and that was just a quick expedited left-hand approach. So check out the lessons in the tutorial menu and do some reading in some books, and you'll get more acquainted with the flight systems. And I will be putting more tutorials up here for some of the newer pilots so that they can at least enjoy FSX to its full extent. and not be overwhelmed. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section and I'll be happy to answer those. All right, take care, guys.